In this video series, we're going to be installing VyOS onto some virtual machines in VirtualBox, tying them into GNS3, and using that to create a topology as seen over here on the right. This is a class topology that we're using for a capstone project, and it's roughly mid-CCNA level in terms of difficulty of concepts. We're not really going to be looking into how to install GNS3, how to install VirtualBox, how to install the GNS3 virtual machine. We're just going to assume that you know all of that stuff, or you have some alternative, in which case you can just skip ahead to the next video where we'll just get to VyOS configuration. So now we're going to grab the VyOS ISOs we're going to use for this topology. We're going to go over to their website, vyos.io. And their website is seemingly always under construction, but there's two main places where you can get distributions. One is called rolling releases down here, and that is sort of a nightly unstable build where they implement new fixes. As you can see, it's updated very frequently, but it's a little untested for our purposes. We won't be using that one. Down over here is legacy images, and that's where we find 1.1.8, which is what we will be using because it's stable. There's also a 1.2.0 release, which is also considered stable, that we could use, but that requires a subscription. And we're poor college students, so we won't be using that one. So now we have the ISO image that we're going to use, and we're going to create a new VM in VirtualBox for it. And as you can see, I already have a whole bunch of VMs already set up. A lot of them are VyOS experiments, but we're going to set up brand new ones for this as if we were doing it from the very beginning, which we are. So let's create a new VM. Let's give it a name that we're going to remember and also keep it distinct from all the other VyOS VMs we have on here. We're putting a number at the end of this because unlike a sort of general purpose image that you might normally use in GNS3 and just change the configuration, the configurations here are saved in the VMs. So we're going to need a separate one for every router that we build. Luckily, they're pretty small. We're only going to need about 512 megabytes of RAM for each one. Even that's a little bit generous. And we'll give them fairly small storage of about 4 gigabytes, which again is probably a lot more than we need. But storage is pretty cheap nowadays. So now that we've got our basic configuration done, we are going to want to go into our virtual machine and change a couple of things. The first thing we do is open up our virtual optical drive and find the VyOS 1.1.8 image with somewhere in this gigantic stack of images that I have for other operating systems and distros, and load it, and this way we'll be able to install it just like we were on a bare metal machine. The other thing that we want to do is go into network adapters and make sure that we have 4 of them, because we're going to need at least 4 for all of these. Also, we don't want to use NAT or anything. We want them disabled because we are going to use GNS3 to control all of our networking functions. So now that your machine is built and properly configured, you can boot it up for the first time, and it will boot up as if you're using the ISO as a boot device. So we're just going to go ahead and let this thing load. One thing is that it looks like you're in a standard Linux shell, and for a large, for most of the functions you are in a standard Linux shell, but VyOS, unlike other distributions where you're just installing like Quagga or whatever, uses a ton of aliasing. So not all shell commands are going to work the way you expect them to, and definitely not from inside the configuration shell. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this actually makes it feel a lot more like a hardware router with an embedded operating system. So now we're going to use the command install image to write this operating system to disk, and this is actually fairly painless. You go through guided prompts. Most of the time you'll just take the defaults unless there's something very specific that you want to do, and it doesn't take very long at all. And once our image is installed to disk, including grub and our partition tables, what I like to do, because we're working in VirtualBox, is to power it off. And the command for this in VyOS is power off. But this is also a good time to take a look and realize that you can use tab completion. You can use the question mark to see available commands, even with a partial command or with no command. So in that way, it's a lot like iOS. And this helps you quite a lot figuring out exactly what commands to use where. And once your virtual machine is powered off, you want to go into it and check your settings again, and we're just going to remove the ISO from the virtual optical drive. It's true that if you have this set up correctly, that you should never actually have to go back to the optical drive, but better safe than sorry, so I just remove it as a matter of course. And now I'm going to repeat this process twice more to create 2 more VyOS software routers. But I'm not going to make you all sit through that, so we'll just come back when we're done. So now we have our 3 VMs built in VirtualBox to be our software routers. I've also started up VM Workstation Player to host my GNS3 VM, and I've started GNS3. I'm going to create a new project so that we can tell apart from all the other VyOS projects that I have running on there. And we'll start this from the beginning like we said we would. Now, GNS3 can be very picky about how you add devices, so this is just the way that works for me, adding a VirtualBox VM. You open up the settings menu, you go down to VirtualBox VMs, create a new one. You're going to have to run it on your local server because there's just no other way to do it, and then it will show up just as an end device. At this point, you're going to have to configure it to be more of your liking. You can change the icon so it looks like a router or whatever you want. You can change the category of devices where it goes into. Most importantly, on the second tab, you're going to have to let GNS3 know that it has 4 network interfaces, and that's going to allow you to configure them once we get into the next section. And as I said before, you're going to have to do this for all 3 of your virtual machines, so we'll just come back once that's done. So now that we have our 3 software routers imported into GNS3 in the Routers tab, we're going to start laying out this topology, at least the physical part of it. We're not going to be turning anything on. So once you have them imported, it's pretty much just a simple click and drag, and you can arrange it and make it look nice later. That's fine. We're going to put down our 3 routers in the triangle formation mirroring the topology. Then we're going to have to add some kind of a cloud access device. If you're working in ESXi, this is probably nothing more than you configuring a static IP to your gateway on one of the interfaces on router 1. Because we're in GNS3, I'm just going to use the NAT cloud device because it's the easiest one to use. Then we're going to have to add a layer 2 switch down there. I'm going to grab this one, change the icon, make it look like a layer 2 switch, and once we get everything turned on and configured, we're going to turn off IP routing so it doesn't do anything goofy on us. For the hosts and the server, we're going to use a device called VPCS because for the purposes of this topology, they don't need to do anything more than ping, respond to pings, and then either statically assign or DHCP an IPv4 address. So the VPCS container is very small, very lightweight in terms of resources, and does exactly what we want to just fine. So now, as far as the physical topology is concerned, the only thing we really have left to do is cabling. And if you've ever done cabling on GNS3, you realize it's pretty straightforward, really nice streamlined operation. If you are doing this in something like just a hypervisor like VirtualBox or VMware, it may be a little bit more complicated. You may have to run some intermediary switching or just run them through a very large vSwitch in order to get your connections to work. I'm not sure if that's going to interfere with certain functions like LLDP, but it may. Anyway, this is what I'm doing, and as you can see, it's a pretty simple operation. And now here we are with our physical topology set up, our cabling done, and all of our VMs off. That's very important in VirtualBox so that we can start them from inside GNS3. And now we're ready to actually get into some configuration, which we'll get to in the next video. Thanks for watching.